what happens when you mix survival crafting with colony building. Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of Aska. Aska is a third-person survival crafting game developed by Sand Sailor Studio and published by Thunderful Publishing. They released it into early access in June 2024, and as of this review is still in early access, so please bear that in mind. On the outset, someone might take a glance at Aska and think it's Temu Valheim, but there's definitely more to Aska that meets the eye other than a Viking-themed survival crafting game. So without further ado, let's get to the review. I previously covered Aska in a first impressions look for Summer Next Fest last year. Last time, I played the demo with my wife and figured this time we should do the same. I'm not much for playing these kinds of games by myself, but between her and I, they tend to be our go-to genre of choice. Like many survival games, you start on the shores of a beach. There's no starting cutscene or any introductory text. Your player is just on the shore near a wrecked ship. If you spin around, you see a hulking monster, which is presumably what caused you to get shipwrecked in the first place. It walks off, and that's basically the start of the game. In the first few minutes of exploration, blue balls of light will pop up which serve as the game's tutorial. It teaches you the absolute basics, most of which many players of this genre will be familiar with. Gather simple materials, craft rudimentary tools, and find starter sources of food and water to keep breathing. However, the tutorial culminates with you placing down an Eye of Odin. This mystical stone structure serves as the heart of your budding village, and you're instructed to summon in your first villager using Jotun blood. This blue ore can be found all over and is the essence necessary to bring in more help. It's with the villagers that Aska sets itself apart from the other similar survival crafting titles. These villagers can help in a variety of tasks and be automated similar to something like Rimworld. Every villager you summon can be assigned to various workstations like a farm, woodcutter's hut, or workshop. Additionally, they can be trained to be melee or ranged fighters to ward off potential attacks. More on that in a bit. Of course, these villagers aren't just free labor for your budding village. They also have needs that need to be met. Obviously, food and water is a good start and is the bare minimum. Eventually, they'll want more varied diets, have warm clothes for the winter, and even desire a sense of security. While I didn't have any complaints about housing arrangements, I assume that how good their surroundings are and what type of house factors into their overall satisfaction. Each villager has a tier, and presumably higher tier villagers are more demanding, but I wasn't completely sure. Each of the villagers also have randomized traits that affect how they might work or what they're good at. I wish the system was taken a bit further to make them feel a bit more like villagers who have lives and relationships with one another. You could set up a working schedule for them and dedicate leisure time. They get unhappy if they don't have this, but I never once felt that they were really doing anything in this time, as they never seemed to form bonds with one another or have any real implications besides making a bar fill up in the background. I suppose that a game like Rimworld could probably be argued the same way, but I think there is more to a system in a game like that to make the pawns feel just a bit more believable. In Aska, the villagers felt robotic to me. Although they can be very helpful, I quite liked how the villagers helped to mitigate some of the monotony of grinding for resources. Their usefulness actually confused me with how I should approach villagers. I never knew if I should just bring on a bunch of villagers and let them suffer a bit while we all help to build up the village, or if trying to meet the needs of a few at the start was the right way to go and build off from there. My wife and I went for the latter option, and despite their help, still had a decent resource grind. On paper, I think the system is great, as it should be a way for the player to automate a lot of things so they can do other stuff, and maybe not be tied down to the village so closely. However, I don't think many players will be able to hit that sweet spot of providing for villagers and having enough of them to do many tasks for the player. So instead, they'll need to constantly pick up where the villagers can't. As mentioned, some people may be comparing this directly to Valheim, but I think those comparisons would be incorrect, based on things I've already mentioned, but also because of the game loop, at least in the early game. Certainly, Valheim is a game where base building is important, but exploration is equally so, and the game encourages it from the start. On the other hand, Aska seems to want players to be building up their village first before really being able to do any of the other things. Players have villagers' needs to contend with, and the constant desire to improve buildings to open up other crafting recipes feels ever present. It starts simple with a campfire and maybe a couple lean-to shelters, However, it gets progressively more complicated and the building projects more numerous in a relatively quick time. In order for the villagers to actually start working for you, they'll need workstations, starting with the basics being a stonecutter's pit, woodcutting pit, and gatherer's pit. These allow players to be able to set up basic resources and food gathering. Later buildings have certain build hierarchies that need to be met before being able to build something of a certain type. For example, you can't build the farm until you have a gatherer's hut, which you can't build until you've built a gatherer's pit and upgrade it from there. One thing to note about building is that these structures are all set pieces. There is no real planning of a building like in other survival crafting games, where you place every wall, floor, and ceiling. Obviously, there's the planning of the layout of the village, and there are some decorational items for exterior and interiors, for the buildings large enough to have interiors. Although, I didn't mind this because that aspect of a survival crafting game really isn't something I engage with that much. Alternatively, someone like my wife thrives on building cool bases, and she felt it was quite disappointing. So, something to keep in mind if you enjoy that kind of base building creativity. There are many buildings that have prior requirements, and we constantly felt like we had one more building we needed to make in order to have access to things like better houses, the ability to make clothes, and eventually ironsmithing for sturdier tools and weapons. Although, on that last part, we never actually found an area to mine for iron. Luckily, many of the construction projects required materials that were all relatively nearby to collect, so it became a matter of time over resources to just collect long sticks, large rocks, bark, etc., and as mentioned, these things could be sped up with the help of villagers. The game makes resource gathering a little bit easier by having a handy detection ability the players could use to highlight resources. Additionally, you can eventually make things like a sled or cart to make hauling larger objects easier. Aska has little bits of realism represented in the game, which I thought was kind of neat. For your inventory, it's split into small, medium, and large items. Small items are hidden and tucked away, and as the name would imply, you can hold quite a few of these objects. Medium items were larger, like tools or firewood. I thought these were neat because they'd be visually represented on your character. And finally, large items, things like logs or large rocks, were held, making you slower, and you could only carry one of these, hence the need for a sled. Other bits of realism in Aska are things like several buildings needed to be built in stages, the ground needed to be leveled before beginning construction, although I am so happy it wasn't as finicky as Life is Feudal. Various crafting recipes also had multiple stages with various stations, such as needing to sew together leather scraps into leather hide before using another station to cure it. These little bits of realism I think help add to the immersion, but I could also see them as negatives for some who feel the experience to be too convoluted. Additionally, there are seasons in the game. As one would expect, each of these seasons have different visuals, but also affect growing times of various crops, if it's in or out of season, and what you could find while foraging. I'm unsure if this affects enemies or fauna, but I didn't notice it to be the case. Obviously, the biggest thing is needing to prepare for winter. Once the temperatures drop, everyone will start complaining about how cold it is. Death by freezing becomes a real possibility, so you'll need to make clothes. Hopefully, you build the proper thing to be able to make some basic linen clothes. Additionally, having firewood and actual homes is a plus as well. Food also becomes a big issue since barely anything grows during the winter. We only just manage to scrape by scavenging from mussels along the beat. While it may not be as heavily focused, exploration and combat do exist in Aska. Like I mentioned, I never felt much of a need to explore that much, save for trying to find a mine, or even felt that I could. However, going further afield does reveal new points of interest, enemies such as skeletons and wights, and potentially new resources, like when I came across these deer-like animals. Occasionally, there are events that happens where certain enemies will attack your village. Many times, I didn't have a problem fighting them, except for this one time we got attacked by a huge bear. I still don't have a clue how we could possibly be prepared for that, but maybe it was just bad luck. That said, many enemies while exploring, outside of floating tree wisps things, are too strong for the player in the start. Well, maybe not one-on-one, but there's usually more than one enemy around at a time, making things a bit difficult. On that note, I'd like to point out Aska's interesting approach to death. If you do die by combat, or maybe you let yourself starve or freeze to death, then you'll need to select between being reborn or spawning back as a ghost. If you choose the first option, then you lose all your equipment and take a stat debuff, which sounds bad. But if you take the second option, then you'll have a few minutes to find a villager and steal their soul for you to return to the land of the living. I thought it was a clever balancing act of deciding what was more important, your character and stuff, or a villager. Of course, I chose myself every time though. Anyway, I felt like we needed to have proper armor and metal weapons in order to hold our own. Unfortunately, finding a place to mine seemed to be like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Eventually, we started exploring a lot more solely to find an iron mine, and had no such luck, so we were stuck with our basic wooden clubs. Personally, I think the game could do better with encouraging these other aspects of the game and adjusting the balance. Maybe don't give players almost everything they need right in their general vicinity in the start. Many survival crafting games encourage players to explore because certain resources can only be found further afield than where they started. This usually comes with additional dangers. So with that, I think Aska could benefit from having an intermediary tier between the starter weapons and iron. Or if not, then increase the number of mine locations a bit so they're easier to find. In this way, it might help people from burning out solely on the colony building aspects of the game, especially if they're not as interested with that. These last few thoughts are more of nitpicks and suggestions to the devs if they're watching. First and foremost, needing to remember to save before quitting is really annoying. I'm so used to autosave features, and yes, this game does have one, but it's only at the start of the day. Any other time has to be a manual save, and surprisingly, this is the one game that doesn't actually ask you if you want to save on quit. I've lost a good amount of progress several times before finally drilling it into my head that I need to save before quitting. The other big thing is add a little more to the tutorial to explain how to use villagers a bit better. I didn't realize there were priorities for tasks until a lot further. Perhaps this was explained in a text box, but whenever a wall of text is shown, it's not going to be read that closely, if at all. Learning by doing in a game is something I think is always much more effective. There were other aspects to the system though, like why did my villager constantly tell me they couldn't find cabbage seeds to plant despite holding 2 of them? After a bit of frustration, I took the seeds for myself to plant and found out it was because you needed 5 seeds to plant something, which the game hadn't told me until then. Or why did my cook at the barbecue spit just take the cooked food and hoard it instead of depositing it into the small food storage rack? Little things like these might be able to be ironed out with something that better guides the player on how it all works. And that brings us to my final thoughts, but first, if you're enjoying the video or found it helpful, then please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more video game coverage in the future in the form of reviews and first impressions. And hey, if you happen to be watching this video in the first week of its release, then I'd be super appreciative if you could hit that hype button as well, which is a new feature YouTube put out there to help small creators get seen. Aska runs for $24.99 USD, and I put in 13.5 hours into the game. I know there's still a good amount of structures we could build, and a large part of the interior of our island to explore. Basically, for someone who really enjoys this game, then I'm sure there's a bunch more content past the time I put into it. If you could grab it on sale, then I think that's perfect to try the game out and see if it's for you. Personally though, I think Aska needs a bit more time to cook, which luckily the devs seem to be consistent with providing updates to their game every few months. And don't get me wrong, I think there is enjoyment to be found here. I did enjoy building up my village and seeing it come to life, but I think other aspects of the game need to be brought up to speed, or the player offered more guidance to fully appreciate it as a whole. I think to a particular person this game could fit the bill rather nicely, those who really like the idea of colony building, but I think many other players of the survival crafting genre might find things lacking. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.